A Dreamer and a Visionary, H.P. Lovecraft in His Time. By S.T. Joshi. Chapter 1. Unmixed English Gentry. Only an intermittently diligent genealogist, Howard Phillips Lovecraft, was able to discover little about the paternal side of his ancestry beyond the notes collected by his great-aunt Sarah Allgood. Subsequent genealogical research has failed to verify much of this information, especially regarding the Lovecrafts prior to their coming to America in the early 19th century. According to the Allgood notes, the Lovecraft or Lovecroft name does not appear any earlier than 1450, when various heraldic charts reveal Lovecrofts in Devonshire near the Tyne. Lovecraft's own direct line did not emerge until 1560, with John Lovecraft. The paternal line became of immediate interest only with Thomas Lovecraft, who apparently lived such a dissolute life that he was forced in 1823 to sell the ancestral estate, Minster Hall near Newton Abbot. According to Lovecraft, or the notes he was consulting, Thomas Lovecraft's sixth child, Joseph S. Lovecraft, decided in 1827 to emigrate, taking his wife Mary Fulford and their 6 children, John Full, William, Joseph, Jr., George, Aaron, and Mary, to Ontario, Canada. Finding no prospects there, he drifted down to the area around Rochester, New York, where he was established by at least 1831 as a cooper and carpenter. Lovecraft's paternal grandfather was George Lovecraft, who was probably born in 1818 or 1819. In 1839 he married Helen Allgood and lived much of his life in Rochester as a harness maker. Of his 5 children, 2 died in infancy. The other 3 were Emma Jane, Winfield Scott, and Mary Louise. Winfield married Sarah Susan Phillips and begot Howard Phillips Lovecraft. Lovecraft appears to have been much more industrious in tracking down his maternal ancestry, but again his conclusions are not always to be trusted. At various points in his life he traced his maternal line either to the Rev. George Phillips, who in 1630 left England on the Arbella and settled in Watertown, Massachusetts, or to Michael Phillips of Newport, Rhode Island. Whatever the case, Asaph Phillips, probably Michael's great-great-grandson, headed inland and settled around 1788 in Foster, in the west-central part of the state near the Connecticut border. Asaph and his wife Esther Whipple had 8 children, all of whom, incredibly, survived to adulthood. The 6th child, Jeremiah Phillips, built a water-powered grist mill on the Moosop River in Foster and was killed on November 20th, 1848, when his flowing greatcoat got caught in the machinery, dragging him into it. As Jeremiah's wife Roby Rathbun Phillips had died earlier in 1848, their 4 children were left as orphans. They were Susan, James, Whipple, and Abby. Whipple Van Buren Phillips is Lovecraft's maternal grandfather. Whipple attended the East Greenwich Academy, then called the Providence Conference Seminary, probably prior to the death of his father Jeremiah. In 1852 he went to live with his uncle James Phillips in Delavan, Illinois, a temperance town his relatives had founded. He returned the next year to Foster because the climate did not suit him. He married his first cousin, Roby Alzada Place, on January 27, 1856, settling in a homestead in Foster built by Roby's father Stephen Place. Their first child, Lillian Delora, was born less than 3 months later. There were 4 other children, Sarah Susan, Emmeline, Edwin Everett, and Annie Emmeline. Lovecraft's mother Sarah Susan was born, as her own mother had been, at the Place homestead. In 1855 Whipple purchased a general store in Foster and ran it for at least 2 years. He then presumably sold the store and its goods, probably at a substantial profit, thereby commencing his career as entrepreneur and land speculator. At that time he moved a few miles south of Foster to the town of Coffin's Corner, where he built a mill, a house, an assembly hall, and several cottages for employees. Since he had purchased all the land there, he renamed the town Greene, in honor of the Rhode Island Revolutionary War hero Nathaniel Greene. It is remarkable to think of a 24-year-old essentially owning an entire small town, but Whipple was clearly a bold and dynamic businessman, one who would gain and lose several fortunes in his crowded life. One particular financial collapse, in 1870, led to the selling of the place homestead in Foster and a move to Providence. Whipple settled initially on the west side of Providence, the western shore of the Providence River, site of the present business district, since his business offices were in this general area. In connection with his various businesses, he traveled widely in Europe, particularly France. He attended the Paris Exposition of 1878, England, and Italy. By this time Whipple Phillips was clearly a man of substantial means, and aside from building the house at 194 Angel Street in 1880–81, he undertook what was to be his most ambitious business enterprise: the establishment of the Owyhee Land and Irrigation Company in Owyhee County in the southwest corner of Idaho, which had for its object the damming of the Snake River and the irrigation of the surrounding farming and fruit-growing region. Kenneth W. Fagg, Jr., has performed a remarkable feat of excavation in supplying the details of his enterprise, and I can do no better than to summarize his findings. The company was incorporated in Providence as the Snake River Company as early as 1884, with Whipple as president and his nephew Jeremiah W. Phillips as secretary and treasurer. Initially the company dealt in land and livestock, but shortly thereafter Whipple shifted his attention to the building of a dam, not over the Snake River, as Lovecraft erroneously believed, but over its tributary, the Bruneau River. Work on the dam began in the autumn of 1887 and was completed by early 1890. Whipple purchased a ferry in 1887 and established a town near the ferry on the Snake River, naming it Grandview. He also built a Grandview Hotel, to be managed by his son Edwin. At this point disaster struck. On March 5, 1890, the dam was completely washed out by high waters, and the $70,000 spent in constructing it was lost. A new dam was begun in the summer of 1891 and completed by February 1893. Whipple was, of course, by no means permanently at the site. Indeed, he appears to have visited it only occasionally. We shall see that, when he was not in Idaho, he was spending considerable time and effort raising his then only grandchild, Howard Phillips Lovecraft. The Owyhee Land and Irrigation Company suffered some sort of financial difficulties around 1900, and on March 12, 1901 the company was sold at a sheriff's sale in Silver City. Whipple Phillips was one of 5 purchasers, but the total property value of the company had been assessed on May 25, 1900 at only $9,430. The final blow came in early 1904, when the dam was wiped out again. Lovecraft states that this second disaster virtually wiped the Phillips family out financially, and hastened my grandfather's death, age 70, of apoplexy. Whipple Phillips died on March 28, 1904. After his death, 3 other individuals bought out his interest in the Owyhee Land and Irrigation Company, and renamed it the Grandview Irrigation Company, Limited. It is clear that the Owyhee project was Whipple's principal business concern during his later years, although no doubt he had other interests in Providence and elsewhere, as his wide travels suggest. He did, however, certainly lose a good deal of money in the Idaho venture. Nevertheless, the picture that emerges of Whipple Phillips is that of an abundantly capable businessman, bold, innovative, and perhaps a little reckless, but also a man of wide culture and one who took great concern in the financial, intellectual, and personal well-being of his extended family. Lovecraft's elder aunt, Lillian Delora Clark, attended the Wheaton Female Seminary, now Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts, for at least the period 1871 to 73. Lovecraft states that she also attended the State Normal School, and was for some time a teacher, but her attendance at the normal school has not been confirmed. Lovecraft was proud of the artistic skills of both his aunt and his mother, and claimed that Lillian has had canvases hung in exhibitions at the Providence Art Club. Lovecraft speaks little of his uncle, Edwin Everett Phillips, and does not seem to have been close to him. Edwin briefly assisted his father in his Idaho enterprise, but he returned to Providence in 1889 and attempted, not very successfully it appears, to go into business for himself. In 1894 he married Martha Helen Matthews. At some point they were divorced, then remarried in 1903. Throughout his life Edwin held various odd jobs, and at some point established the Edwin E. Phillips Refrigeration Company. His one significant involvement with Lovecraft and his mother was, as we shall see, an unfortunate one. Annie Emmeline Phillips, Lovecraft's younger aunt, was 9 years younger than Susie. Lovecraft remarks that she was yet a very young lady when I first began to observe events about me. She was rather a favorite in the younger social set, and brought the principal touch of gaiety to a rather conservative household. I know nothing about her education. We can finally turn our attention to Sarah Susan Phillips, born on October 17, 1857. Regrettably little is known about her early years. Lovecraft states that she, like Lillian, attended Wheaton Female Seminary, but her attendance can be confirmed only for the school year 1871 to 72. From this period up to the time of her marriage in 1889 the record is blank. Clara Hess, a friend of the Lovecrafts, gives a description of Susie, probably dating from the late 1890s. She was very pretty and attractive, with a beautiful and unusually white complexion, got, it is said, by eating arsenic, although whether there was any truth to this story I do not know. She was an intensely nervous person. Elsewhere Hess remarks, she had a peculiarly shaped nose which rather fascinated me, as it gave her a very inquiring expression. Howard looked very much like her. What little we know of Winfield Scott Lovecraft prior to his marriage derives from research recently conducted by Richard D. Squires of the Wallace Library at the Rochester Institute of Technology. Winfield was born on October 26, 1853, probably at the home of George and Helen Lovecraft at 42 Marshall Street in Rochester. George Lovecraft was at the time a traveling agent for the Ellwanger and Berry Nursery, a major business in Rochester. The family attended services at the Grace Episcopal, now St. Paul's Church. These facts may be of some relevance to Winfield, since he was himself a salesman, and was married at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Boston, even though his bride was a Baptist. From 1871 to 1873 Winfield was employed as a blacksmith for the James Cunningham and Son Carriage Factory, Rochester's largest employer for many years. During this time he boarded with another uncle, John Full Lovecraft, in a home on Marshall Street. By 1874 all traces of Winfield Scott Lovecraft disappeared from the records in Rochester. Lovecraft stated on several occasions that his father was educated at a military school, but the location of this military school has not been traced. Winfield clearly did not attend West Point, as a check of its registry of graduates establishes. It is possible that it may not have been a formal military academy, of which there were very few at the time, but a school that emphasized military training. In any event, it is likely to have been local, somewhere in New York State, perhaps close to the Rochester area. At some point Winfield moved to New York City, as this is given as his place of residence on his marriage certificate. He was probably doomed there with his cousin, Frederick Lovecraft. I disbelieve that he became employed by Gorham & Co. Silver, then one of the major business concerns in the city. The evidence for this employment does not derive from any statement by Lovecraft, but from a remark by Lovecraft's wife Sonia in her 1948 memoir. It is not clear how and when Winfield began work for Gorham, and why, even if he was working as a traveling salesman, he was listed as a resident of New York City at the time of his marriage on June 12, 1889. Equally a mystery is how he met Sarah Susan Phillips, and how they fell in love. Susie certainly does not appear to have been a society girl like her sister Annie, and Winfield was not a door-to-door salesman, so that he is not likely to have met her in this way, nor, if he had, would the social mores of the time have allowed them to fraternize. The Phillipses were, after all, part of the Providence aristocracy. The fact that the wedding ceremony took place at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Boston may or may not be noteworthy. We have already seen that Winfield's family was Episcopal, and although there were many Episcopal churches in Providence where the ceremony could have taken place, the fact that Winfield planned to settle his family in the Boston area may have made St. Paul's a logical site. Indeed, it might have been odd for a member of the Phillips family of Providence, so associated with the Baptist faith, to have been married in a local Episcopal church. I discount the possibility, therefore, that the marriage was somehow not approved by Susie's parents, for which no true evidence exists. Although she was 31 at the time of the marriage, Susie was the first of Whipple Phillips's daughters to be married. As she was still living under his roof, it is not likely that he would have allowed her to marry someone of whom he did not approve. Lovecraft, so keen on racial purity, was fond of declaring that his ancestry was that of unmixed English gentry. And if one can include a Welsh strain on his paternal side and an Irish strain on his maternal side, then the statement can pass. His eternal line is, indeed, far more distinguished than his paternal, and we find Rathbones, Matthewsons, Whipples, Places, Wilcoxes, Hazards, and other old New England lines behind Susie Lovecraft and her father Whipple Van Buren Phillips. What we do not find, as Lovecraft frequently bemoaned, is much in the way of intellectual, artistic, or imaginative distinction. But if Lovecraft himself failed to inherit the business acumen of Whipple Phillips, he did somehow acquire the literary gifts that have resulted in a subsidiary fascination with his mother, father, grandfather, and the other members of his near and distant ancestry. End of Chapter 1.